An entire world is ready
for you to start your career teaching the path to wellness.
Mastering the science of mindfulness.
And the art of coaching.
To help clients achieve mental, emotional, and physical betterment of life.
Through movement,
nutrition,
recovery, and regeneration.
Because impacting one person impacts a family.
Impacting a family impacts a community.
And impacting a community impacts the world.
Become an NASM certified wellness coach.
Hello and welcome to this week's Master Instructor Roundtable. I'm Marty Miller, Regional Master Instructor, here with fellow Regional Master Instructor and dear friend, Miss Wendy Batts. Wendy, how's it going today?
I'm doing great, Marty. How are you?
Great. Looking forward to this week's topic. It's one of those things I think that are near and dear to our heart. Like if the foot and ankle isn't working, it's hard for the rest of the kinetic chain to work. So this is why we chose to dig in a little deeper here.
Yes, and want to say thank you again to our Facebook page, as well as some of the emails that Marty and I receive each week. And we're going back to the roots of program design for, we'll do some sprinkled in throughout the next few webinars, starting with the foot and ankle, because there's still a little bit of confusion on how do you design a program with one specific impairment and then, blend it into a phase one workout. And so that's why we wanted to bring this back up this week. Foot and ankle, like you said, Marty, when it doesn't work, it really can affect the entire kinetic chain. So I'm really excited about today's topic for sure.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll get into our stories as the conversation goes, but both of us have seen people with upper extremity issues that we could tie back to foot and ankle. So I know that it's easy to see how foot and ankle could correlate to knee and or hip, maybe low back, but it truly, when you're in, especially nowadays with the push towards more high intensity and functional training and running and jumping, man, oh man, if the foot and ankle aren't working well, there's going to be potential problems.
Well, my favorite is with my clients, with me having the manual therapy license that I have, before we even get started, I do some manual work and then I put them into their workout for the day. And first thing I do is I have them lay on their back. So they're in a supine position. And I look at their hips and they're like, no, you don't understand. Like it's in my shoulder. So I look at their hips just to see kind of what's going on at the ASIS, because that can tell me a lot. And then I go look at the foot and ankle and do a comparison for leg length discrepancies. And they're like, no, I really am having some pain in my shoulder. I'm like, I gotcha. But we're going to start here. And you just have to trust me that it really does work its way up. And so I could just work on your shoulder, but I really may not be helping you long-term because it can start in the ankle. And the facial expressions I get are second to none. They're like, are you sure about this? I'm like, what? I've been doing this for a really long time. I feel really confident in my decision of where I'm starting first.
Yeah. People like to chase pain, unfortunately. And as an athletic trainer, I've had athletes come in, same thing, or clients now. And they're like, this hurts. And, you've heard me say this before, Wendy, and I'm sure you use very similar analogies. Are you going to go after the robber or the victim, right? So dysfunction, there may be no pain in the region that's dysfunctional, but everyone wants to focus on the area that dysfunction is causing pain in. And sometimes, not saying you don't want to treat the pain. And here in fitness, you and I both have a different license. So we're not here to treat pain. But as you communicate with your clients, pain, refer out, discomfort, work on their movement assessments and go to what the findings show you. And sometimes that mild discomfort immediately goes away because you're getting them to move well from different segments of the body.
Absolutely. Well, and that's actually what we're going to talk about. So when we look at, all in all today, we're going to talk about foot and ankle. And so we're not only going to talk about the feet externally rotating or turning out, which is very, very common, but you also want to see what's happening at the arch of the foot, because, most times, well, I shouldn't say most, a lot of times you're going to see people that have their feet turn out. And if they have their knees caving in as well, if you check out the arch, most of the time the arch is also falling too. So really all of these assessments can really blend in. And when one thing's happening, you want to start to really identify, or at least take a look, a specific glance at the arch of the foot. And, that's what we're going to talk about. So if you do see either of these compensations or both, today is your day, because Marty and I are going to talk about not only the dysfunction through different types of assessments, but also we are going to give you a specific program that we designed that will help with both of these compensations, still keeping it within phase 1. So if you don't have your corrective exercise, I'm telling you, it's one of my favorite specializations that NASM has done. But you're not going to be lost today, because we are going to do a blend for you. And if this is something that you're noticing your clients have, then hopefully you guys can print out or take a screenshot, if you will, of the program that we designed, because I think you'll find it very, very beneficial. Absolutely.
And again, reassess every 4 to 6 weeks, but every set, every rep, every exercise is a reassessment in a way.
Absolutely. If you're not assessing, you're guessing. Well, that'll kind of bring us into, and I know some of this may be a review, but the overhead squat assessment can tell you so much about a person. You can find out not only why they came to see you, but somebody may say, I feel great, but I want to get in better shape. But when you look at their assessment, you're like, how are you not in any kind of discomfort whatsoever? Because you'll notice feet are out, maybe arches are falling in, knees cave in, low back arch, arms fall forward, forward head. I mean, it's kind of like a train wreck, but it's very, very common that you see multiple. So again, we're just kind of really focusing today on the foot and ankle. But, when you're doing the overhead squat, you want to make sure, once again, that you set them up in the 5 kinetic chain checkpoints, because you have to have a starting point. So have your clients, number 1, remove their shoes. You as a trainer, I think it's very, very important that you set the client up exactly how you want them to be. Because again, you may say, hey, make sure your feet are pointed straight and they're not looking down and they're completely out to the side. And to them, that feels straight. So I usually start teaching them my cueing at that point when I'm actually doing the assessment. Like, hey, I want you to think of, skis, and I want them to be pointed straight ahead. Yours are slightly going out. And imagine how awful that would be if you're going down, some kind of slope. So feet pointed straight ahead, kind of show them what you mean about the arch of the foot, make sure they have good alignment in their foot and ankle. You also want to make sure too at that point that they're, from a lateral view, that the ankle, the knee, the hip, the shoulder, and their head are in good position. So when they raise their arms overhead, you're going to take the bend out of the elbow and you're just going to have them squat. Most of the time, you're going to have them squat from, looking at them from an anterior view, about 5 repetitions. Same thing from the lateral view. And then I still look at the posterior view, because in a way, and you're going to see what we're talking about in future slides, if you look from a posterior view, you're starting to really look at the Achilles tendon, and the Achilles tendon should be straight with the calcaneus, so your heel bone. And if you notice that there's kind of an arc, like almost like a C type or kind of a bend, then that's letting you know that they're probably falling in of the arch of their foot. And so you're going to want to note that in your assessment process. So therefore, it can be even more specific and individualized when you're designing the program.
Yeah, great recap there, Wendy. And for those of you just joining us right now, Marty Miller here with Wendy Batts, 2 of your regional master instructors, and we are discussing foot and ankle complex and the impairments that you'll see. It's such an important part of the body. As we were talking about earlier, that what you see happens at the foot and ankle will definitely resonate through the rest of the body. So it's key to understand how your client's foot and ankle is performing, regardless whether they have what they think is dysfunction or not. It's key just to understand, are they in the right position? Is their foot and ankle biomechanically doing the right thing? So that way, as you get into the different levels of exercising, they're ready to handle all the different requirements to go from stabilization endurance to strength endurance, potentially all the way up to power.
Absolutely. And there are different assessments, and we're going to talk about that. So therefore, if you want to dive a little bit deeper, we're going to show, especially if you're not sure about what you're seeing in the overhead squat, that it's safe for them to move forward, maybe with some more specific assessments. As we move forward into the next slide, you're going to see some of the other types of assessments. So when we talk about overhead squat, we're talking about transitional movement. But then you also want to think too, if you do have your CES background and you've taken your specialization or are currently going through the material, mobility assessments can tell you a ton of information. And so one of the ones that, or multiple ones that Marty and I use, especially to identify what's happening throughout the kinetic chain, is the overhead squat, number 1. But then if you actually do a modified overhead squat with the feet elevated, it can allow you to see what's happening at that ankle. Because if you put your foot on like a 2x4 and you have the heel like just on that area and their feet planted on the floor, and you put them back into the 5 kinetic chain checkpoints we just talked about, and then had them repeat the assessment, and you notice that all of a sudden their knees cleaned up, that if they had an asymmetrical shift, that maybe that cleaned up a little bit, or the compensations itself, they look like they're squatting a ton better, and they feel better squatting it, or they feel better when they're squatting, excuse me, then you're going to be able to say, you know what, really the ankle is causing some of these other compensations that were noted by allowing, with that elevation. And that elevation, the reason why we're doing this is because it lets us see with additional dorsiflexion, we're giving them that. If they had that originally, then what do they look like during movement? So we're going to talk about, including the modified overhead squat. We're going to talk about what you'll see during the single leg squat. The split squat is a new mobility assessment that we've added into the CES this past launch. And so we'll talk a little bit about that and what you may see. And then, of course, when we talk about mobility assessments, if you're not familiar with those yet, but you've gone through our CES in the past, we'll talk about obviously using a goniometer. I still use a goniometer today. I'll probably use it until the day that I die, because when we start talking even more in detail about it, if they end up having compensations during movement, but then you really look at the joint, but they have good full available range of motion, then you know that it's more of a weakness. Okay, this is important. It's more of a weakness than it is the overactivity that's causing that compensation. So that's one of the things when you're really trying to be very, very specific in your programming, that information is great to know. So maybe don't just stop, or don't just stop at the overhead squat. If you know some of these other assessments, then you can be even more pinpoint to help them quickly get better range of motion and movement throughout their squatting process as well as daily activities.
Yeah, and when we list it out like this, it seems like there's a lot to do, and you're like, my client just wants to work out. When you get the handle on how to integrate these, how to communicate them, how to blend them in, if somebody isn't ready for a full assessment, it really does not take long. But we wanted to show the exact kind of like breadcrumb trail, as we would call it, is start here, go to here, go to here, see this, do this, just because there is a full process that has been researched, and it's an evidence-based approach, as you would all know here with NASM. But again, when we do our corrective exercise workshops, either virtually or if we get back live, we talk about how to, blend things in, because again, we're going to teach you in a perfect world scenario as if somebody comes in and they're okay with a full assessment. But these are the skills and the abilities to do certain tests at certain times for you to really dig in and be able to create the best program.
Absolutely. Great point. All right, so let's move on. So, again, when we talk about, quote, this bread crumb, and like all we say is, here's, like Marty said, here's where we're starting. This is where we're headed. The overhead squat, you're looking at them from the anterior view and the lateral view. And then there's just a lateral view of what it looks like with the feet elevated. And so again, it's allowing you to see with that, with that rise and giving them the extra dorsiflexion, how they move. Now, if their ankles are overactive, kind of locked up and restricted, if you will, then what you're going to notice, maybe not only with the feet turning out, but from a lateral view with their feet on the floor, then you're going to notice maybe that they have an excessive forward lean. And so if you elevate the feet, can they keep their feet straight? And then from a lateral view, do you notice perpendicular lines? Or parallel lines, excuse me. I don't know what's happening with me today, but parallel lines. And again, that's ideally what we're looking for, because just to reiterate what we've said multiple times, the reason NASM wants you to have those parallel lines is because that means you've got good distribution between the ankles, the knees, and the hips. And so when you have that and you've just elevated their heels, it will allow you to really dive deeper into what we're going to talk about next when we get into the different assessments.
Yeah, and don't be surprised when people feel better when they squat with their heels up. But that's a question I'll ask, is do you just even feel better with this? And the answer is yes. Doesn't mean that I allow them to squat like this when they start getting back into their exercising, but it is an indication of a couple other things too, what goes on with the core, and it allows their hips to sit back. But we get that question a lot. Well, if it makes them move better, should I have them squat like this? No, we should start cleaning it up so they can eventually squat without their heels elevated.
Yeah, and there's other exercises that we talk about that instead of rising the heels, I mean, yes, that would clean up their movement if there's restriction in the ankle complex. Like, but to your point, you're not going to walk around with your heels elevated unless you're wearing high heel shoes, which is like what's commonly happening with the foot and ankle. A lot of the high heel shoes that women are wearing, even if it's a low high heel, anything with elevation, men's dress shoes can cause that, and even some tennis shoes that have elevation in the heel can lead to that. Because if you're in those shoes for multiple hours in the day, then those muscles, that's what they know. So as soon as you take those shoes off, they don't have that elevation, right? So their feet turn out because they don't have the range of motion needed in order to keep those feet straight comfortably. And so that's why sometimes people aren't even aware that they're doing that. And as trainers, I think it's important to say, hey, check yourself throughout the day. If your feet are turning out, straighten them, because you're having to reprogram your brain to say, oh my goodness, like my feet are out, I need to straighten them. My feet are out, I need to straighten them, because it is going to be something they have to work on themselves, because you want to be that voice in their head, Marty. I hear that all the time.
The annoyance in there.
Yeah.
So as Wendy and I get moving forward, those that are just joining in, we are discussing foot and ankle impairments today, the corrective strategies, the process to assess, as well as we are going to provide a little case study here at the end. So thank you all for joining in. This is a key part of what we do in the fitness industry, is keep people moving better. And a lot of it starts at the foot and ankle.
It does. Okay, so you've done your overhead squat. You just did the squat with the heels elevated, and maybe you noticed that they cleaned up, meaning they felt better. They may have gotten lower. Well, if you felt like it was safe, meaning that their feet may have turned out, but it doesn't seem like there's anything that would cause concern if you tried to do a single leg squat assessment, then at that point, then go ahead and put your client into this next assessment. The single leg squat, again, you're going to put them in the 5 kinetic chain checkpoints. Their hands stay on their hips, because again, if their hands are out in front or out to the side, sometimes that will help with their balance. Or if their hands are forward, you're not really getting a good evaluation of their core strength and what's happening in the torso. So that takes everything out of play by just doing that. But then you're also going to see if their foot is straight and planted, what's happening at the hip and knee. And, if there's restriction at the ankle, they're not going to be able to go down as far. They're probably going to lose their balance. There's going to be internal rotation probably within the torso to keep their balance. And so it's just kind of an assurance that you're on the right track, even though pretty much with the foot elevated, that can tell you a lot. But again, that's going to be up to you on the safety of whether your client should or shouldn't do the single leg squat. And I personally do this with most of my clients, as long as I know it's safe for them.
Right. And Wendy, just as you mentioned on the overhead squat, and we have a great picture here, shoes off. It's shocking that a lot of times people, that's the one thing they forget, right? So again, do this with just like the overhead squat and the modified, no shoes.
Yeah. And guys, the reason we say that is because not only are, like I said before, with the heels elevated in some of the shoes, but there's so much arch support in different brands of the shoes that if they have that arch support, you may not really be able to identify truly what's going on with the kinetic chain, because there are kind of band-aids there to assist them. That's why those arches, are in the shoe. The support is in the shoe. And the same thing, people will always ask, well, what if they wear orthotics? Well, if they wear orthotics, then it's probably because they have weakness in the arch, and that's my job to help strengthen them. And if they say, well, I'm flat-footed, a lot of people aren't truly flat-footed. And Marty and I have talked about this in previous webinars that, there are people that are born without an arch of their foot. But if you do not have them weighted and you see that they truly have a flat foot, then, and again, it's not as common as you may think. It's just when they stand, that arch then disappears. That means there's weakness. And that one weakness in the arch can cause a lot of compensations up the kinetic chain, but it's also something that we can work on strengthening to help them get rid of those orthotics long-term as well as maybe reduce the amount of support that they have to have in their shoes in order to feel better throughout the day.
Yeah, I was a perfect example of this. When I was a young child starting to get into sports, I was given orthotics and diagnosed with flat feet, and I wore orthotics for 10 years until I got to college and started studying sports medicine. My arch, non-weight bearing, it's perfect. And when you really watch me weight bear, my foot doesn't flatten, I evert. So my calcaneus went lower to the ground. So this was, I don't remember what type of physician, or professional was the one that diagnosed me 15 years earlier. They're like, oh, he's got flat feet, because they saw my arch lower, but it never flattened. So I wasted 15 years walking around with orthotics and not doing a corrective strategy. And I get that people didn't understand that, but I was a perfect example of, I was just everting, and yeah, the orthotic would stop me from everting, but it never solved the problem because I didn't have flat feet.
Right. Until you take your shoes off and wear like flip flops, or just walk around your your house with no shoes. So
yeah,
that's a big one in my
still
family.
good.
No
It's
shoes
just,
when you get in.
I just avert, you know what I mean? So it looks like my arch is lowering, but I'm still working on it.
There you go. It's always a work in progress, Marty. And those of you guys that are joining Marty and I today on the Master Instructor Roundtable, we're talking about the foot and ankle specifically. If you see the feet turn out or the arches fall forward, what can we do to help identify, to make sure that we're on the right track to be able to design a very specific program to help individuals that have these two compensations. And so far, we've talked about the overhead squat. We've talked about the feet elevated, the single leg squat assessment that you can do. So those are all very, transitional, meaning movement. And so now we're going to actually get into a little bit of the mobility assessments that you can kind of take a step further, and what you can do to design a program, like I said, whether it's for overactivity, underactivity, or even both.
Perfect.
All right. So let's move on.
So I can cover this one if you want. So when we look at mobility, again, this is some of the newer content that we put into the CES a little while ago. It's phenomenal. And we go in depth on any of our workshops that we do. Is when you see people, and Wendy did a great job at the beginning explaining this, so I'll just touch on it quickly, is when you see somebody have a movement compensation, when you look at the corrective exercise spectrum, you have the one side where a muscle could be overactive, where we inhibit and lengthen. You have the other side of the spectrum where a muscle could be allowing a bad motion or a faulty movement pattern because it's weak. So you activate and integrate. So how do you know which one to do? So the mobility assessments allow you to break down joint by joint. Is it overactivity where you need to maybe spend a little more time on the inhibit and lengthen? Or is it underactivity where if they pass their mobility assessments, there's a weakness? Now, sometimes you'll see both, and that's fine. So here with the foot and ankle, what you see here is this weight bearing knee flexion where they try to touch the wall. You start with your forward foot 2 inches away from the wall, not a lot of distance. You have your back leg nice and straight, your foot straight. Obviously, we always want your pelvis in a neutral position. And all you do in this weight bearing lunge is on that front leg, keeping the heel straight, not letting it turn out, not letting the arch fall. You're just seeing if they can accept weight onto that front knee, and can they get their knee to touch the wall. It's that simple. It's pass fail. If they have to arch their back, if they have to spin either of their feet out to do it, if their arch falls inward to get their knee to the wall, it's a fail. That means they're restricted from a muscular standpoint. So they need that inhibit and lengthen. If they had a poor movement assessment and they pass this, you could really start to focus on, is it the anterior, posterior tib, medial gastroc that are weak? And that's why you saw it in their movement assessment.
And if I'm going to pinpoint this, I'm going to say she's a big fat fail.
Right.
If you want to know.
I knew you would, but remember, we did not take these pictures.
And I know that they have this image in the book.
Right.
We do use wonderful models throughout all of our textbooks as well as in our videos. But guys, the reason I say that is because look at her back foot. Her back foot is externally rotated. And then when she lunges forward, that foot still is externally rotated and she has an arch in her back. And so what ends up happening is, remember, your body's going to pull from whatever it possibly can in order to, quote, get the end results that the trainer is asking them to do. And so ideally both feet would stay straight. So even though her test leg, if you will, looks fantastic, her arch is up, her knees touching, she still looks like she's, upright and it's not a struggle. She's getting probably a little bit more, because again, 2 inches isn't a lot. So she's getting a little bit more by externally rotating and turning the hip a little bit to get that forward motion. And so if you were to do this, I always say practice on yourself. If the back heel comes up, the foot turns out, the knee bends at all, so other compensations happen throughout the kinetic chain, then it's a fail. And all that means is, and you don't say, oh, you failed that to your client, because again, you never want to use negative feedback, but you're going to say, okay, great. Now let's do the other side. And in your mind, you're saying, okay, she failed the left side, and who knows what's happening on the right, but she failed her left side. So therefore, on the programming side, you're going to really spend a lot of time on the overactive muscles, which we're going to discuss here in a few minutes, the overactive muscles that cause not only the feet turning out in the overhead squat, but then also what caused her to fail in the mobility assessment.
Yep.
I didn't know if you thought the same thing with that, Marty, but
I saw it and I was waiting for you to come in with the big fat fail.
Yes.
I don't do it as well with the big fat fail, so I figured.
Yeah. But, too, if you guys haven't really looked at the new mobility assessments, and Marty and I talked about this when we were talking about the newer content, we did that because a lot of people were still unfamiliar using a goniometer, which is like the human protractor that you'll see in the image. And if you haven't taken courses or you're not familiar with it, then the mobility assessments of setting a client up and doing that lunge forward or the different mobility assessments we'll talk about in the future as we do these. If you want to do those, they take 2 seconds to do. You literally just have them try to touch their knee to the wall. Can they do it? Yes or no. Do the other side and you're done. And that's actually giving you giving you a little bit more information about the client and what you're finding. If you are not familiar with that, but you know how to use a goniometer, you still love your goniometer, which I do, then if you were to put them on a table, you actually bring them into subtalar neutral, so neutral position in the ankle, and then you have them dorsiflex, or you help them dorsiflex and tell them to hold it, then you're going to take the goniometer and measure. An ideal measurement is 20 degrees. Now, most people are very restricted in the ankle joint. However, not all. That's why the mobility assessment can tell you yay or nay, and why the goniometer can give you specific feedback. But that, again, is another tool. I wouldn't say do the mobility and the goniometer, because you'll have kind of the same output. But if you're more familiar and comfortable using one or the other, both I think are very important to know, but then use the one that you're the most comfortable with when you're thinking about designing the program.
Perfect. Well said.
Thanks, man.
All right. So when we look at the assessment, the key thing, and Wendy, you always mention this, and it's a great reminder, is use the solution table for help. There's nothing wrong with walking around with your clipboard, having a solution table underneath, right? If we go to a medical professional and they have to reference something, we would never think twice about it. We would hope they'd reference things. So same thing, that solution table will always lay things out for you. It's a great way. The more you visualize it, the more you look at it, you're going to start to see the patterning of it on how certain muscles are participating in multiple movement dysfunction. So when you look at the feet turnout, your overactive will be your soleus, lateral gastroc. Sometimes you see that as the calf complex. The bicep femoris, the hamstring muscles, the short head is the one that does this. That's the one that causes that lateral or external rotation of the lower leg. And then TFL, one of the muscles in your hip flexor complex, your tensor fasciae lata, with the foot on the ground, can cause that external rotation. It could be all of these, some of these, but that's why, again, we have the different mobility assessments.
Absolutely. And remember, if you see overactivity, these are going to be the muscles that you're going to want to foam roll and statically stretch. So if we have overactive muscles, that means on the other side, we're going to have some underactive muscles. So when we look at the underactive muscles, it's going to be, think about, what would allow those compensations. So if we go to the next slide here, we've got them listed out for you. So you're going to see now, instead of the lateral gastroc, it's going to be the inside of the calf. So the medial gastroc will be weaker. The medial hamstring, because as Marty, just said, that more of the lateral side of the hamstring is going to allow that. Cause that. The medial side of the hamstring would allow it. Shockingly enough, the glutes are going to be weak. That's something that we see all the time. And then, if we're going to go down to the nitty gritty, you don't want to go ahead and think about the gracilis and the popliteus as well.
Yeah. And if these terms are not something you're familiar with, that's why we have the CES, and that's why we do our CES workshops. We've been doing them virtually through the pandemic, and that's where we dig in deeper on these type of things.
Yes, but use that solutions table, y'all. That's what it's there for. Help us help you.
Without a doubt. So we'll move forward here. So when you look at, again, the solutions table, the foot flattens. This is a true foot flattens where they have an arch, and then weight bearing, the arch goes away. The perineal is the outer side, the lateral side of the calf complex. Lateral gastroc, once again, shockingly, the bicep femoris short head. And then once again, the tensor fasciolata, even in the hip, can cause this. So you're going to, again, as I said, you'll start to see a pattern of muscles that tend to be overactive and muscles that tend to be underactive.
Yes. And then, of course, where there's overactivity, there is underactivity. So if we go to the next slide, I know. And, we've got this image here on both of the slides because, we wanted to show you when we talk about the foot flattening, what that truly looks like. Supination is obviously the opposite of that, where you've got an extremely high arch or where they're going the other direction. We don't spend a lot of time designing programs for that because it's very, very uncommon. And if you're not sure, that's when you can truly do a single leg squat assessment to see, does that still hold true when they're on one leg?
And if this is what you see, you just reverse engineer what we're showing you.
Exactly. All right, so let's look at the underactive muscles here. We've got the anterior tibialis as well as the posterior tibialis, the medial gastroc. Oh, there's a repeat, shockingly enough. And then the glute medius.
Right. So this is where, again, knowing these muscles, knowing how to target them from the inhibit, lengthen, or the activate, integrate will really help you with your program design.
Yes. And if you guys are just joining Marty Miller and I on the Master Instructor Roundtable this week, we're really trying to break up the foot and ankle impairments. What are common compensations that you're going to see, which is the feet turn out and the arches may fall in or cave in to make kind of more of a flat foot appearance. We've talked about doing all the different types of assessments that we would do just to confirm what we're seeing, and then helping us identify the muscles to kind of work on specifically if this impairment exists with our clients as well as hopefully yours as well. All right, moving on.
All right. So this is just, when you put the slide together, just kind of, again, more the anatomy of visualization of what we just kind of went through and talked about. A lot of times we get asked, do I need to know the origin and insertion and the nerves? No, those are nice to know, but you have to know what the muscle does. So when you see a movement pattern, you know what muscles are primarily responsible for creating that either normal movement pattern or the faulty movement pattern. So if you're new to this, Wendy and I, we might start, babbling off origin, insertion. That's great to know. We have to know it from a manual standpoint, where we put our hands into somebody, we can find the anatomical features and really target that. That is not needed for personal training. What you do need to know is the names of the muscles, what they're responsible to do, and if they're overactive, what they will do, or if they're underactive, what they will allow the body to do. That is where you really need to start. So that way you can create a program and watch the person's form and technique to make sure that they're ideally targeting the right muscles to create the right movement patterns to fix their movement compensations and get them moving as much as you can towards that ideal kinetic chain checkpoint, depending on any type of movement that you're doing.
Nicely said, Marty.
Thank you.
All right, so let's look at this program. So we've got James Smith here. Again, he's a weight loss client, but he did have foot and ankle impairments. And so when I say that, let's imagine that his feet turned in. I mean, we could actually have him do, both compensations, because again, there's a lot of commonalities that we saw with the overactivity and underactivity of both of the compensations. And so from a self-myofascial technique, remember what we're trying to do there is down regulate the overactivity of certain muscles. So as you look through this, if you want to go back, think about the muscles that we just talked about being overactive. Those are what were just inserted there to femoral, and then again, statically stretch. And so what we're trying to do is gain length back into the overactive muscle to work on proper length tension relationship of the joint. And then if you want to do dynamic stretch, that's where one of my favorites for this is the inchworm, where you're having to really kind of go down and then back and try to work a little bit through the newfound length that you're gaining. and try to get some activation in there as well, working through that joint. But then, after you've warmed up, then you've got to think of and I say warm up, after you've gotten some flexibility in the overactive complexes, then it's important to think about the weaker side. So where we had everything listed as underactive, what would be prime or good movements to help activate those muscles that were shown to be weak? And so doing calf raises with the toes slightly turned in really emphasizes the medial gastroc. So again, the lateral is what's having that foot turn out. That lateral gastroc is highly responsible for that, as well as the short head of the bicep femoris. So if we're going to spend time working on that above, then we need to think about what we can do to activate the inside or the opposing side of that. So calf raises with toes in, thinking about the tempo. So using a 4-2-1 tempo, up for 1, holding at the top for 2, and slowly coming out of that for 4 seconds and repeating, I think is a really good exercise for that. And then doing the anterior tibialis. Now, if you were a student of mine and you wrote anterior tibialis, you would get points off because that's the name of a muscle. But as you can see in the notes, use a cable or use a band, utilizing that to try to get activation in the shin area, if you will, because again, I was like, it does say cable or tubing, right? Because you need to actually identify how are you going to strengthen that. And that therefore too, if I wrote this program and gave it to you, you knew exactly what I was trying to do. And then of course, after you did your anterior tib, those are very specific, more of a kind of CES individualized process. Then you could go into the floor bridge. And you could do a ball bridge, floor bridge, but the same thing. We're really trying to activate, again, the glutes, which were shown to be underactive, and they're underactive in a majority of the compensations that you're going to see in your clients. So to me, doing any type of bridge is always a benefit. And then at that point, as soon as they've done that, we would go into we didn't write any single leg stuff, but I would do maybe a single leg balance with reach. Because again, you're working on arch alignment, you're working on trying to maintain proper positioning of the foot and ankle complex, and then going right into a squat jump with stabilization hold. And when you look at this program so far, so all of the stuff I just mentioned, that's not the workout. And that is what I want to emphasize. That is your warm up in a complete sense, where you're now getting yourself prepared for the resistance portion of the training. So Marty, you want to talk about the resistance side?
Yeah. So the key thing is now that you've earned the right to get into the training, right? Now you'll see how Wendy put the program together, that there's still going to be that slow controlled tempo. And now we're getting into the bulk of it. So standing cable chest press. So again, if we're looking at someone with a foot and ankle issue, we're not just having them stand and do a cable chest press. We're positioning their foot. We're reminding them to find a neutral arch position, neutral lumbar spine position. Then they're doing the standing cable. Basically, Wendy and I could care less about the chest press part of it. We're purposely loading the body where they have to fight that resistance as they come back against the chest press of everything that's connected to the ground, from the foot and ankle all the way up. Yes, the client loves that they're doing a chest press, but honestly, that's probably the least important part for Wendy and I. So you'll see the notes there is triple extension. That's on that back leg. So that way their foot and ankle, then their knee and hip are all in a straight line, neutral spine position, and that way now they're fighting that resistance on the chest press. Then you got a single leg cable row. Again, as soon as we go single leg, the load on the row has to be less, and that's fine because we're purposely trying to target, can they maintain their kinetic chain checkpoint with their foot on the ground in the right position, and think about how much more those muscles will have to dig in and work while they're doing the rowing motion. So again, it's slow and controlled. And obviously you would do each arm on anything that is single leg, single arm. So this one, we have single leg cable row. So if you're doing 2 arms, you would just switch feet back and forth. So if there's 2 sets, you could start first set left foot, second set right foot. And then obviously on the first exercise, you could do the first set left leg back, second leg back on the second set. Then ball prone Cobras are phenomenal. So again, you're getting that triple extension on the back side of the body, the lower body. And as you're doing that Cobra, you're getting into that posture work, which is phenomenal. And then step up to balance. So again, as we step up, we're looking, can they maintain that position in the foot and ankle? Can they drive up through the glutes, get back into that nice perfect posture position, and pause at the top, which really makes that foot that's holding them up really work that balance component. And anytime they're on a single leg, holding positions, all those little intrinsic muscles in the foot are really working hard. And those are the ones that help support that arch. So it's really, really important. And then Wendy's nice. She gives somebody their choice. So if they're going to ask for the gun show, she's going to put them on a single leg. I'm sure they didn't say single leg bicep curl, but because we're looking at foot and ankle in that stabilization phase with some corrective, she's going to be mean like always and put them on a single leg, which will force them to go slower and control, reduce the weight on the bicep curl. But when they're going through that much tempo with that much time under tension, they're going to really feel it. And once again, that is when you start to feel those muscles in your foot start to burn. And now, you know, you're getting those little intrinsic muscles fired up.
Yes. And one thing too, you're going to notice where we have triple extension, just to reiterate that for some of our newer, newer trainers, all we mean is when you're in a prone position and it says, you know, toes against the wall, you're literally going to have your foot up against the wall. You're digging your toes in between the wall and the floor of, you know, your floor. And it's kind of like you're kind of digging into that. So therefore you've got extension of the ankle, the knee, and the hip. So you want to think about as a gait, when you push off, you go into triple extension. And when you're bringing your foot forward, you're going into triple flexion. So flexion of the ankle, the knee, and the hip as well. So when they come up to the step up and balance, that's when triple flexion comes into play. And then when they're, you know, doing anything prone or in the staggered stance for the chest press that Marty just said, that triple extension, you get what you train for. So why not throw in other things that are going to be very beneficial? Plus, as they're working through the dorsiflexion, you know, to get better range of motion, especially as overactivity that we're causing some of those compensations, you're really trying to get, you know, get your body to learn how to play well with the newfound length that you're hopefully gaining and strength on the weaker sides. So therefore, you're constantly working on those compensations, even though they don't know it.
Accidental exercise.
Yes. And then always cool down. So as you know, we're always going to go back into rolling those areas that we worked in this specific program, which is, you know, in phase 1, you can always repeat exactly what you did in the warm up without the dynamic stretch. So you're going to go into your self myofascial technique for the lateral gastroc again, the short head of the bicep femoris and the TFL. And then you're going to statically stretch those same areas. And always, always quality over quantity. And if you see compensation, then you either need to regress the exercise or reduce the weight.
Well said. That's a great workout. It's going to challenge people more than they think. So as we get into our key takeaways, multiple joints and muscles make up and control the foot and ankle complex. So again, we start maybe small, activating anterior tib or posterior tib, and then we get into our integration. And anytime you're on a single leg doing anything, obviously there's going to be a lot of work all the way down through the kinetic chain, especially at the foot and ankle. Have to shockingly identify the compensation so you can create the proper strategy to fix those movement compensations. So you have to be able to do your assessment process. And then right after that, shocker, once again, Wendy, assessments are key.
Assessments are key. Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And then record anything that we see is not normal. And there was, sorry, that went so quick. I didn't have all those memorized, but so we can go back.
Well, yeah, it's just basically work on faulty movement patterns and don't forget to reassess.
Yes.
Reassess every 4 to 6 weeks.
Awesome. Thank you. Sorry. All right. Now we'll go right to our contact information. So Wendy, if these amazing people want to find out more and reach out to you, why don't you go ahead and give me your information?
Yes. If you guys want to contact me, you can email me at wendy.bats@nasm.org, or you can find me on Instagram at wendy.bats13.
And then our amazing producer is going to put my information up there. Marty.miller@nasm.org is the email. And then Instagram is dr.martymiller72. Wendy, great topic. I'm sure we're going to have some follow-up questions. So as you said, we'll come back in a few weeks and answer those questions. But for all of you that joined us today, thank you so much. We hope we found it beneficial. And we look forward to seeing you on our next Master Instructor Roundtable.